James Baldwin had this really great quote that said, "The most segregated hour in America is high noon on a Sunday." Sometimes the most egregious acts of white supremacy, of racism and transphobia that I'll see is people in faith communities. In every religious group I've ever been a part of or seen, people have always talked about humans being more than just their physical bodies, that we are spiritual beings temporarily housed in physical bodies. And who defines that more than trans people? That someone can give you a name for your body and for you to say no to that. For someone to give you an identity based on how they're perceiving you in this life and in this world, and for you to defy that. Even myself as a kid, I see from a distance this being who exists outside of what has been prescribed to them, to not even have the language for it, but to be able to come into myself. I think that's magical. I think that is spiritual, and I think that is transcendent. My name is J Mase III, and what I do in the world is I'm a poet, I'm an educator, and I would like to imagine myself as a theologian. So my mother was raising us as Baptists. My father comes from the Nation of Islam. Both those traditions have a legacy of Black liberation and Black liberation thought that has shaped me. Yeah, so honestly what I was thinking about to start off with, just so we have everyone has the same lay of the land, is that you? But so I'm gonna start off with a piece. I've had the blessing of touring all over the country in different parts of the world as a poet primarily. So when I say story time, y'all say story time, story time, story time, story time. As Black trans folks, we get pushed out of so many different types of working spaces. Being an artist is oftentimes one of the only accessible work forms that we have. Felt a lot like joy and calm and loyalty. I hear that's what some people call love. And maybe I didn't. As a young person, I hadn't really heard the words queer or trans. The Christian side of my family really hammered home that weird people were not good. They were not of God. And so this is before I even came out in any kind of context. I was already locking myself in my room praying this thing out of me. It's one thing to be told that I don't like you versus not even my God likes you. When you see that reflected to you on TV, when you see that reflected from your family, when you see that reflected from your neighborhood, it has an impact. When we think about this in a larger context, regardless of whether or not you yourself as a trans person are religious, a lot of our rights are being dictated that way. The people that are most hardest hit are Black and brown folks, are folks who are immigrants, are folks with disabilities, are folks that are working class. There needs to be better theologies of survival for trans people. People who are legislating against us, people that are causing violence against us in the streets, they have a comprehensive theology that's been passed down since colonization started. A part of my work and what I'm trying to do in the world is to disrupt some of those narratives and to expose the ways that toxic theology bleed out into so many parts of our lives.
Good morning, Seattle. You're listening to Church with Mr. B here on Hollow Earth Radio, KHUHLP 104.9 FM. I have the incomparable J Mase III here in the studio. What's new?
So last time we did have a really good conversation about domestic violence and the ways that church theology plays into that. There's a Black trans woman in Detroit who was murdered by a pastor just at the end of last year, right? And so I think about in that space now, how many clergy stood up and said that was not acceptable? How many clergy came to Kelly's defense? How many protests have I seen from religious leaders knowing that one of their own clergy just did this? We can't just talk about our trauma, we have to also talk about our ongoing healing. The Black Trans Prayer Book, this is a project I'm creating with a friend of mine, Lady Dane Figueroa Didi, who is a priestess, also a poet, and an author of many books. We're getting Black trans folks from all over the country, from different parts of the world, participating in this theological collection. This came out of wanting to create healing tools specifically for Black trans people who have to deal with so much. We're gonna have chapters in there on dealing with sexual violence, dealing with intimate partner violence, or prayers for when you're traveling, things that many other theologians would have never thought about, right? But we're doing this stuff every day, and we're with ourselves and in these bodies every day. Can I do a quick check-in with y'all? There's gonna be folks from a multitude of different religious backgrounds are putting together this book because we recognize that no one religion can hold our legacy. And so I think that's what's also beautiful about this is that regardless of what tradition you come from, you can find something of yourself as a Black trans person reflected into this. This next poem I'm gonna do and hope that I get it right. Yeah, and so do you believe in me? Because I believe in you. I've had the capacity in my life to spend so much of my time with other Black trans people. And I want us to be able to change the lives of young Black trans folks that are coming up, as well as elders that never knew that they had the rights to feel the ways that we're sharing. I want to see people see an intergenerational, interfaith group of people talk about Black trans spirit. Those things make me feel hopeful that we can create some different type of resilience and a different type of resistance.